There's all these kinds of sayings about if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. They all mean the same thing, which is you have to be involved. Trump has been indicted for 91 felonies, and he simply can't accept the fact that he's allowed to lose. They're poisoning our residents, and our kids are dying because of this. If you have to tell people that you're an important person, you're not important.
All right, episode 66, Stay Classy podcast. Happy to have Kevin Sabellico on today. Thanks for coming on, Kevin.
Thank you so much for having me.
And one thing I wanted to ask you right off the bat is, we always like to be like a current news, trending show. And one thing that's going on right now in the news, it seems like I can't open Twitter. I refuse to call it X. I can't open Twitter now without seeing another Trump story after another Trump story. Today, the story seems to be, he won the New Hampshire primary, but today there's the story about the Jean Carroll trial. I just want to get your thoughts in terms of kind of where you see this going, what's at sort of stake in this general election, and what to think about this from our perspective.
Well, first of all, Trump has been indicted for 91 felonies.
Yeah.
It's shocking to me that he can be even running for president, let alone winning two of the first early states for the Republican nomination. It shows just how far the Republican Party has fallen out of touch. But as for the Jean Carroll case, I think he should just write her a blank check at this point. He can't help himself from defaming her, and he already had to pay her a check. He's back in court again, and he simply can't accept the fact that he's allowed to lose. He just simply can't lose and can't wrap his mind around losing. That's why he couldn't admit that he lost the 2020 election. Which is why he's finding himself back in court for this, for all of his criminal cases that are pending against him right now. He just cannot be elected president.
Yeah,
our country will tear itself apart. We could lose our republic if he is elected president.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot at stake. Now, in terms of the Jean Carroll case, for people who aren't familiar, she was somebody who accused Trump of, she accused him of sexual harassment and actually rape. He was found liable in civil court for the sexual harassment part. I don't believe for the rape. I think that's maybe ongoing. That case, but the defamation part happened afterwards. So he came out afterwards and basically defamed her over the case, and so now he's getting sued again. But then not only that, but as you mentioned, he's under 91 felony indictments. Those are sort of split into, 4 different categories, because there's election interference. There's 2 election interferences. There's, what else is he being indicted for?
The New York case is about his payment to porn star Stormy Daniels.
Stormy Daniels, yeah. And then the 4th one...
That's about the insurrection.
The insurrection, yeah, the January 6th, 2021 incident, where Trump, incited the mob to go after the Capitol to prevent the certification of the election. Now, I wanted to ask you, you kind of already touched on it in terms of what's at stake in the election, but for people who are maybe just are sort of tapped out, can you kind of catch us up? What are sort of, other than just Trump, being a bad person, what are some of the core issues that are at stake for all Americans, regardless of whether you're local, wherever you live, just what are some of the issues that are at stake in this election?
Well, first of all, I think Joe Biden has done a good job managing our foreign affairs of this country in a way that Trump miserably failed at during his presidency. So I think that he is handling the war in Israel and against Hamas appropriately, and making sure that the United States continues to support Israel, make sure that we insist on following international law, protecting civilian life. We ended the war in Afghanistan. We are back under the Paris Climate Accords. So we have improved our standing internationally. But domestically, we have protected millions more acres of public lands. We have made the economy great, in my opinion. The Dow Jones is at a historic high. We've brought inflation down from its historic high after the pandemic. I think he's done a fantastic job. There is definitely room for improvement, and no president is perfect. I have some criticisms of him, but I was proud to vote for him in 2020. I was a member of the Electoral College, actually appointed by Mike Levin,
Yeah.
which to this day remains one of the proudest moments of my life. And I will vote for him again.
Now, one thing I wanted to bring up in terms of like President Biden is, there was sort of a question after he won in 2020 of, will he run for re-election? Like it seemed likely, but it wasn't a for sure at the time. And then sort of questions were cast up about, his age and the fact that he's, 80? And just like, whether he can, hang around for a second term. And, on the Republican side, there's a lot of accusations about, his purportedly declining mental state. And regardless of that, like, do you think that it was a mistake for the Democrats to not look more seriously for an alternate contender, to not like look hard for maybe somebody who is like younger, more energetic, more appealing to independents? Or do you think that this was like sort of the plan all along and this is just kind of the way it is?
Enjoying this episode? Subscribe for more content on finding your own path to success. Every subscriber makes a huge difference to the pod, and we're grateful for everyone. And don't forget to throw us a classy like and comment too to let YouTube know that you're a fan of our stuff. Now back to your regularly scheduled podcasting.
So I'm a member of Generation Z. I know I don't look it, but I'm 26 years old. So I certainly understand the need for having younger voices in our governments. It's a problem when we have a sort of gerontocracy running things, when no one who represents our generation is in a position of power. And I recognize that that's a problem. But I also think that Joe Biden has done a great job, as I was saying before, and he deserves to be reelected. I don't think he's suffering from any kind of cognitive decline as the Republicans are accusing him of. In fact, I think Trump might be. Just hearing him talk, it sounds more and more insane each time.
Nikki Haley and Pelosi. And,
I do think that long term, we need to have a serious conversation about making sure that the younger demographics are represented in our government. But I do think Joe Biden has done a fantastic job, and I think that he's the best person to defeat Donald Trump. And the reason I think that is because he's done it before. Sure. He's the only person who's beaten Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. So why, if it's not broken, don't fix it.
Sure. Now, I want to shift things to the local level, talk about this race a little bit that we have going on, that you're running for in Carlsbad. Now, first of all, I just want to give some background info on you. Just briefly, I know I've interviewed you before when I was working at the Coast News on a few different occasions while you were working as the campaign manager for now State Senator Catherine Blakespear. But you've also done more than that. You also managed a campaign, correct me if I'm wrong, for Chris Duncan when he was running for the San Clemente mayorship. You also, as you mentioned, were a member of the Electoral College in 2020, appointed by Mike Levin, and you're been a member of the Planning Commission in Carlsbad since 2021. Anything I'm missing, leaving out, or?
Yeah, that was a great summary. I was actually appointed to the Planning Commission 3 years ago today exactly.
Oh,
so
congratulations.
I just found that on my Facebook memories this morning.
Okay.
So I'm beginning my 4th year, which I can't believe it's been 3 years actually. And I'm excited about it.
Yeah. How will that work if you are elected to the council? How will that work with the Planning Commission role?
Oh, you can't serve as a commissioner and a council member. You would have to resign, yeah.
Vacate the seat. Okay.
Yes.
On the planning. Okay. So yeah, you're running for District 2, City Council, Carlsbad. And one thing I wanted to ask you is I always like getting people's sense of why people are, where they are in life and why you're running for office, what sort of inspired you, what motivated you to do this, at what point you decided to do this, how did that begin and what was the chief inspiration?
Well, my parents moved here in the 90s with me and my twin sibling. My dad was a Coast Guard officer. My mom worked part-time while raising a family. And they were able to buy a home here in Carlsbad and do it on a middle-class income and live pretty comfortably. And that's no longer possible today. I mean, you and I probably will go look on Zillow and go look at what it looks like in the neighborhood we're in right now and just cry. It's impossible. And I make a good salary. I'm happy with where I am in life, but it will be a very difficult struggle for me to afford to buy a home in Carlsbad if I want to stay here, and I do want to stay here.
Yeah.
I want to continue living in the place where I grew up and serve the community that I know and that I serve now on the Planning Commission and serve in that more involved capacity on the council.
Sure. Now, when you started to think about running for public office and you were managing Blakespear's campaign, and you managed that other campaign as well. Like, was there any like point where like was running for public office something that you like sort of always thought about doing, or was there maybe a particular person in your life or a mentor or somebody you worked with who like sort of motivated you or like sort of a model to you as like, I want to not necessarily like emulate exactly, but just like, somebody who like pushed you in that direction?
Yeah, my mom is a big inspiration to me. She was a bartender on Cape Cod where her parents had a summer home, and she at the time was working pretty close to Hyannis, where a lot of the bigwig Democratic politicians were at the time. So she got a job working for the Tommy O'Neill and Associates. Tommy O'Neill was Tip O'Neill's son, who was the Speaker of the House, and she got to meet a lot of Democratic politicians that way. She knew all the Kennedys. She knew John Kerry, and she has been very much insisting that I do not run for politics.
Oh, okay.
She does not want me to be in that life. She thinks a lot of them are mean and bad people. But I believe that living a life of public service is very honorable. My dad was in the Coast Guard, as I was talking about, and putting yourself, putting your community first, putting your community over yourself, and making sure that you're doing everything you can to make your community better than it was before you got there. I think that's really important to me. And that's part of why I'm running. I also just believe in, there's all these kinds of sayings about if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. There's an inscription right above the San Diego County Administration building which says, "Good government demands the intelligent interest of every citizen." These sayings, there's tons of them. They all mean the same thing, which is you have to be involved. There's an importance of showing up, and if not you, then who? So that's why I'm running for office. In addition to what I was talking about, making sure that middle-class families have opportunity here in Carlsbad, like my family did, I want to make sure that that continues to happen, and we continue to preserve what makes Carlsbad so special and make it possible to achieve that dream in the future.
Okay. No, that makes sense. But like in terms of one last question on that is like, did you growing up maybe, or like, I mean, I know you talked about like, inspiration from your parents, but like growing up or like even now, like in, engaging in political and civic like yourself, do you have like any political leaders like that you sort of look up to, or like maybe favorite politician from history or anything like that along those lines, or not really?
Well, you mentioned Senator Catherine Blakespear. I definitely think of her as a role model. I worked for her for almost 2 years and talked to her every day. And I see the great things that she's doing now in the state Senate. And I saw all the things that she was able to accomplish in Encinitas. I definitely think of her as a role model and want to do a lot of the same things that she did here in Encinitas. I want to do them in Carlsbad. So safe storage, I want to have a safe storage ordinance in Carlsbad. I want to convert to 100% renewable energy in Carlsbad. I want to ban ghost guns in Carlsbad. So there's a lot of progress that I think is long overdue in Carlsbad. And I've seen leaders like Catherine Blakespear, like Mike Levin, like Vice President Kamala Harris, all of who I've worked for, and I've seen the things that they're able to do. I think that serving in that capacity on the City Council would enable me to do that.
Sure. And I do want to talk a little bit later about like, the experience that you had working with Ms. Blakespear, who's now state senator. But before we do that, like just to outlay, like to explicate the race a little bit in Carlsbad District 2, in terms of like what's at stake and, how this election is affecting people. So far you're running as a Democrat against Kevin Shin, who's a Marine Corps veteran, firefighter with the Culver City Fire Department, the owner of the Switchboard Restaurant on South Coast Highway in Oceanside, and then Muir, who was the superintendent for the San Diego Unified School District. She's no longer in that position. But tell me a little bit about, like, in terms of, like, what's at stake in this race and sort of how you feel like you measure up against these challengers.
Well, I think she was a school board member, not the superintendent.
Correct. Yeah.
But I think that, well, first of all, I'm a lifelong Carlsbad resident. I have a history of serving in the community. I'm a planning commissioner right now. And I grew up here. I volunteered. I coached tennis. I instructed people in tennis. I umpired in Little League. I volunteered with our high school's Rotary chapter, and I was an altar server at St. Elizabeth Seton Catholic Church. I know this community really well, and I'm the best person to carry on those Carlsbad values. So I'm Carlsbad raised. I know Carlsbad. I've served this constituents here in Carlsbad, and I'm the only person who's actually had a voting record here in Carlsbad. I'm literally the only person who has cast a ballot in Carlsbad running for this seat. So I think that definitely differentiates me and makes me the more experienced, most qualified candidate to do this job. And it's not an entry-level position. It really requires a lot of thoughtful leadership and knowledge about things that I have, and respectfully, I don't think my opponents have that.
It's interesting because I did want to ask you about this. Like when we were getting ready for this podcast episode, I was looking a little bit at your opponents, and particularly with Muir, like there has been a noticeable absence of media coverage over her campaign. In fact, I've only spoken to one reporter who vouched for her running, and so far, other than that, it's been sort of like rumors about like, you know, she might be running, she might not be running. So like, what's your thoughts on that, and like, what do you think about her like potential entry into the race?
Well, I've known Mo for actually a while now. Yeah. I was an intern for County Supervisor Dave Roberts, and she was on our Community Enhancement Grant Advisory Committee. So people talk about those funds like slush funds because they kind of are, and they, you know, the county supervisors give money to a bunch of nonprofits, which are good, and they do good things with that money. So I know her from that, and she was also a school board member at the schools that I went to. She was a school board member at the Encinitas Unified School District, which I attended, and at the San Diego Unified High School District, where I attended. So I've known her a little bit, but I saw her recently in December. I was returning some nomination papers for one of my clients, and she was returning nomination papers for herself. She's running for Central Committee on the Republican Party, and so is her husband. So I know that you wrote a story last cycle, 2 years ago now, about when she ran for school board, and the Republican Party didn't endorse her because of some controversy that she had with another Republican candidate. And I think that's maybe perhaps has something to do with why she's running for Central Committee, so she can run for this seat and be endorsed by the Republican Party. Not a bad idea. So I talked to her. She definitely plans on running, but I couldn't tell you why there's no campaign infrastructure out there right now.
Like I couldn't find a website. I couldn't find like anything on it, but it's interesting. But yeah, you are right. There was a story. Well, I mean, I wasn't the only person to cover it, but there was a story that I wrote about almost 2 years ago now about the fallout she had within the Republican Regional Party because of the fact that she had a longstanding internal dispute with Philip Graham, who was a prominent Republican politician in the region, I think like 5 or 10 years ago. And there was just that conflict led to her not getting the endorsement, allegedly. And in turn, she then did not seek re-election for the school district. So now it's interesting that she's just, like sort of running, but hasn't really like put it all together. Do you know anything about your other opponent, or like what are your thoughts on just how this race is shaping out?
So I think that I'm the only candidate running what I would call like a real campaign right now.
Okay.
I brought literature with me to this interview. I'm going out knocking on doors. I'm raising money. I'm holding community events. I've raised $27,000 from grassroots contributors, and I'm really proud of the effort that I'm putting into this campaign. I'm putting in a lot more effort in the coming year now that it's the election year, and after the primary, when the focus won't be on these other races and the focus will be more on these local races. I'm running a serious campaign that can win in this district. This is going to be a very tough district, and a district that a lot of people focus on from outside of Carlsbad even, because it's important, and it will determine the partisan control of the council. And I do want to win this race, and if I win this race, we will have a Democratic majority on the council. So it's going to be tough, but I've won tough races before. When I managed Catherine Blakespear's campaign for state senate, we flipped a Republican district blue, and we actually we now have a Democratic state senator for our region for the first time in 140 years. 1882 was the last time we elected a Democratic.
Did you subscribe yet? If you like our content, it's the easiest way to support the pod. Hit the subscribe button on the bottom right and keep it classy.
State senator. Yeah.
Now let's talk about that for a bit. So, I interviewed you and got to know you over the course of the time that you managed Catherine Blakespear's campaign for state senate. Now I think it's no secret that when she was mayor of Encinitas and at the simultaneously launching her campaign for state senate, she was locally a polarizing figure. She had a lot of support. A lot of people love Catherine. A lot of people love her policies, love what she's done for the community. A lot of people feel quite differently. And so it was a very, in my opinion, polarizing race. There was a lot of vitriol directed towards Catherine, towards her campaign, towards her supporters. And there was just a lot of honestly, in my assessment, nasty back and forth that happened over the course of that campaign when she ran against Matt Gunderson. But I wanted to ask you, from your internal perspective, what was that like? Not just professionally, managing the campaign in the midst of a very polarizing time of that election and, being on the receiving end of that, but also just personally, I'm sure that took a toll. What was that like for you from the insider's perspective?
Well, I have to say that it was a joy to run that campaign. I've worked on a lot of campaigns. I think it's 18, including my own. And that campaign taught me more than any other campaign I've ever worked on. I'm immensely proud of the result that we accomplished, but it was also a very fun time. I really got to know now Senator Blakespear. I got to know all of the staff that we employed on the campaign and all the many volunteers. We had events all across California in support of her. And, there's always small town politics that kind of disrupt a campaign of that size, and we have to focus on the bigger picture and focus on the issues that people really care about: preventing gun violence, protecting the right to choose, supporting small businesses. Those are the focuses of her campaign, and that's why she was able to win. Sure. And that's why she is now in the Senate working on all those things and passing real legislation that will protect our community.
What was the most challenging aspect of managing that campaign? Was it sort of the vitriol, especially in Encinitas, the small town politics, as you talked about, people criticizing her for different things, whether it was the social media comments lawsuit or just a number of other things to do with housing. We could talk all day about it, but we both know what the controversies were, but was that the hardest part, or was it something else in terms of the biggest challenge that you had to overcome in getting that campaign together?
You know what? The biggest challenge wasn't any of those things. The biggest challenge on a campaign of that magnitude, and really any campaign, I can tell you now from experience, is raising money. A lot of campaigns live and die by how much money they raise. And it's a problem. It's a real problem that we have in this country, where we don't have serious campaign finance reform, where we have self-funders who are able to just write big checks to themselves and avoid the other kinds of restrictions that apply to other candidates who aren't able to self-fund. And we were up against someone who raised a lot of money and wrote himself a big check from his car dealerships that he sold. So that was the biggest challenge.
He got some national dollars too, right, or no?
Yeah, he raised money from Newt Gingrich, the former Republican Speaker of the House. So that's the biggest challenge in a campaign like that, and really any campaign. And the good thing about running a local race like this is there's 19,000 people who are registered in Carlsbad District 2. And I'm planning to go out and talk to them directly. And I will do that over the course of this campaign. So money isn't the be-all, end-all in a race of this size like it is in Congress or state senate or for the presidency. So a grassroots campaign can really make a big difference running for local office, and that's what I like about this race.
Sure. Now, one more question on the issue of that campaign before I move on, which is during that campaign, I know for a fact, because I was surveying these online forums and I was reading people's comments. I was engaged in discussions. I was going to the city council meetings. I know for a fact that there was a lot of, as not to beat a dead horse, but vitriol directed not only at Catherine Blakespear, but directed at those around her. I'm sure directed at you. I seriously want to know, from a personal standpoint, was there ever a point where the amount of negativity directed your way was sort of challenging, or how did you deal with that mentally? What was sort of how did you sort of put that aside, compartmentalize, and focus on like what needed to be done?
Sure. Politics is gross. There's all kinds of people who go a little too far sometimes in their support or opposition of a candidate. And, we have freedom of speech in this country. And you just have to grapple with that fact and, put it in the place in your mind. And like I was talking about earlier, focus on the issues. Like, don't get weeded down by the hate and vitriol. Don't let the haters define your life and define your campaign, because that's how you lose. And that's what I told the entire team every week. Don't let it distract you. Just focus. And I believe that's how we were able to win.
Yeah. Well, the results speak for themselves with that one. You guys did win the campaign, and now it seems like you're in a pretty decent position in the District 2 race. But I want to ask you about a few specific policy issues. I mean, one issue that is mentioned when I was researching for this interview, when I was looking online and when I was talking to you, was the issue of LGBTQ rights and how that's important to you personally, and how you believe that. I mean, sort of we're at a point nationally where those issues are the discussion around those issues has evolved over time, in terms of going from, for instance, gay marriage being legalized, 2014, 2015, in the Supreme Court decision, to now it's a different kind of discussion that we're having around these issues. But locally and regionally, statewide, nationally, what about these issues is at stake, and why is this so important and such a defining issue to you?
Well, it's a defining issue for me because I'm a member of the LGBTQ community. I'm openly bisexual, and my twin sibling identifies as non-binary. So it's important to both of us, important to my family. And I was raised in Carlsbad to be welcoming and accepting and tolerance, and that's the values. Those are the values that I grew up with, in a military household: respect for everybody, hard work, integrity. And that's not what I've been seeing from everybody on the city council right now. We had a council member, Melanie Burkholder, who represents District 1, who actually proposed raising the Confederate flag in the city of Carlsbad. And the reason that she did that was because we raised the Pride flag for Pride Month in June, and it was a divided vote on the city council to do that, 3-2. And she was very upset about this and said, if you're going to raise the Pride flag, well, then you really have to raise every flag. You have to raise the facial pain awareness flag and all these flags that I've never heard of in my life. But one of them was the Confederate flag. And she really proposed, why don't we just allow anyone to raise any flag on city property? And there's a few problems with this. One, you don't have to do that. It's government speech. The government can control its own speech. It's not, restricting the freedom of any, no one has a right to fly their own flag on city property. So legally, it's questionable. But more importantly, from a moral standpoint, you don't raise the Confederate flag on government property. We had a whole war about this.
We did.
And the North won. The South, the slave owners, they lost. And we don't do that anymore.
Yeah,
we don't secede from the Union. We don't support traitors and terrorists.
People are talking about that now in Texas.
Yeah, exactly.
Secession.
We had an insurrection recently in 2021. So it seems like we're losing our country.
Floating backwards.
We're going backwards, and we can't even agree on basic things anymore as Republicans and Democrats. We used to be able to agree that secession wasn't a good thing, and the Confederacy wasn't a good thing, and that equality under the law was a good thing. But now we have a council member wanting to raise the Confederate flag, and that's just offensive to me as an LGBTQ person. Obviously, we used to have an LGBTQ member of the city council in Carlsbad, and she was the first LGBTQ elected official in North County ever when she won in 2016, and she was no longer able to continue serving, in part because of the hate and vitriol that she received from members of the community. And honestly, the Democratic Party didn't do enough to support her.
To back her up, yeah.
Yeah, and that's obviously what, when I launched my campaign, I was anxious about that, and I still am, because I'm putting myself out there. A lot of people who know me don't even know that I'm a member of the LGBTQ community, because there's actually it's hard for members of the LGBTQ community who are bisexual to feel included. There's a lot of erasure of that as an identity. Mm-hmm. So it was actually like a decision point for me to run on LGBTQ issues. But I decided to do it in large part because of what happened with, the pride flag and, this proposal to fly the Confederate flag. I needed to make it an important issue in this campaign. And it's important to note the parties. I know these offices are nonpartisan and people work together. It's not like Congress or the state Senate where, they have these caucuses and there's actually like real institutional divisions and people don't talk to each other like in the other party. People on the city council work together regardless of what party they're in, but the party that they're in really has an impact on what they choose to focus on. Like, you would never see a Democrat try to fly the Confederate flag in response to raising the pride flag. I don't think that would ever cross someone's mind if they were in the Democratic Party. So that's why it's important. And I'm not like, this piece of literature on it doesn't say the word Democrat on it. It says, I'm committed to Carlsbad. Yeah. And I am committed to Carlsbad. I'm committed to these issues of keeping Carlsbad safe, protecting our coast and climate. These aren't partisan issues, but it's the extremists on the other side who are polarizing and making this a partisan thing on the city council.
Well, let's talk about some of those issues that are being polarized. So one thing that is central to your campaign, it seems, is the issue of climate change and the issue of, protecting, the gains that we've made in the area of climate change as a community, but also, making further inroads on that front. Now, something that I was looking over this report recently from the University of San Diego's Nonprofit Institute is pretty disturbing, basically saying that, regionally, like, temperatures are expected to increase by like 5 degrees Fahrenheit, as much as 10 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of the 21st century, largely due to greenhouse gas emissions from human activity. Other studies kind of say the same thing. Long story short, the outlook for our region is pretty grim. But like, from your perspective, like, what are the policies and the solutions on the table right now at the local level that have an impact on this? And I understand that a lot of this it's not just like what we do here. It's like, affected by the whole world. It's affected by things like the Paris Climate Accords, and it's affected by what we do at the federal level, what we do at the state level. But regionally and locally, like, what can we be doing differently?
Well, when I talk about protecting the coast and protecting the climate, yes, it's about climate change. It's about more than that, not just climate change. It's about protecting our endangered species. It's about protecting our open space. But on climate change specifically, there is a scientific consensus on this topic. And it's important that elected officials and leaders recognize that scientific consensus. They don't try to pretend that there isn't a scientific consensus or that there's nothing we can do about climate change. And there's a lot of politicians who take oil money. I am a candidate who believes that we have a responsibility to do our part, even if in Carlsbad it's going to be a small percentage of what we have to do globally. We have to lead the way. So that's why I support converting to 100% renewable energy. We are in the program where we decide as a community what kind of energy we want to purchase. We're not just straight up everyone's in SDG&E. So we have that community choice energy program where we can automatically enroll anybody in 100% renewable energy at no additional cost to the residents.
They want to raise prices?
I don't want to raise energy prices. Energy prices are far too high. I personally would pay $1 or $2 more every month to have 100% renewable energy, and I think that most people would, certainly. Mm-hmm. They do in Encinitas, and that's what I want to do in Carlsbad.
So let's talk about that for a minute. So the community choice aggregation movement has, grown in the last, I would say, 5-10 years or so across California. And in San Diego region, we have, the CEA, the Clean Energy Alliance, and essentially the idea being that we have these jurisdictions come together and they purchase, packs of power that are more renewable friendly and less fossil fuel dependent. But SDG&E still runs the power infrastructure, but we essentially transfer the buying of the energy to the local jurisdiction. So that's kind of the idea behind it, and it's sort of taken off across California. And we have, as I said, the CEA in the San Diego region that's doing this, that's trying to deliver more renewable energy to the citizens for a good cost. Now, do you feel like this movement has been a success up to this point? I mean, I know there's been a good amount of criticism, locally and statewide over the financials of this. And, I was reading a report earlier today where, a couple politicians, I think more on the right side, we're saying essentially that, it doesn't really differentiate itself a whole lot from SDG&E's providing. Like the energy packs aren't a whole lot different. Like, what is your take on this? Like, is this really a big distinction from the way we've been leading the front on renewable energy?
Well, that's exactly why we have to enroll everyone in the 100% renewable option, because that is a major difference from the standard plan that SDG&E has to offer. So I 100% believe that our Clean Energy Alliance is important and very vital to us achieving our climate action goals. And I want to support it. I want to improve upon it. I don't want to tear it down just because it's not perfect. There is a problem in California, and the problem is we just don't have grid reliability. That's why every year in the summer we have these flex alerts that you're not supposed to charge your car or run your dishwasher during 5 to 9 p.m. And yeah, it's a problem in California, and we need to solve it. We need to improve our grid reliability. But making that is important to solve, and as a city council member, I want to do my small part in helping to solve it. But we also need to buy more renewable energy. Like it isn't like just because we can't do one thing doesn't mean we can't do the other thing. We have to do both of them.
Sure. Now, some CCAs have experienced financial instability in California. I believe it was Riverside or Orange County where a CCA did go, I think, bankrupt in the last few years. I think it was in 2021. But the CEA actually from 2022 to 2023, actually lost a lot of money in the course of that fiscal year. So what is like the solution for keeping these things financially independent and viable moving forward so that we don't end up, dragging down the taxpayer?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to compare apples to apples. I mean, SDG&E also is raising rates on people, and it's hurting the residents and consumers. So all of our energy providers are experiencing these same financial problems. The price of electricity is going up for many different reasons. There's a war in Russia going on, and that increases the price of oil and natural gas. And we currently generate a lot of our electricity from natural gas right now. So it's important to recognize the fact that this is a global problem and not a regional problem. Nothing to do with like management of the CEA or these community choice aggregators that we're talking about. I don't know exactly what was the problem with that one in Riverside that you talked about, like that went bankrupt. I didn't know about that until you just said so. But I know that the CEA, our CEA in Carlsbad, is in much better financial shape than other CEAs. Encinitas actually is part of a different CEA, the San Diego Community Power, and the CEA in Carlsbad is in better financial shape, and partly because it's just newer, and San Diego Community Power was more on the front lines, as it were, and doing this when it was very expensive. So now Carlsbad, I think, made the right choice in joining the CEA, and now we're in a much better financial position because of it.
Now, you did mention earlier, you talked about like the problems with grid reliability that we have statewide, not just in the San Diego region. Now, it's interesting because I was talking with you over the phone a few weeks ago about the issue of nuclear energy, and we have 2 nuclear power plants in California. One of them is being decommissioned in San Onofre. One of them is just recently got an extension, Diablo Canyon, up in my original hometown of San Luis Obispo. So that is alive and well at Diablo. There's still a lot of people who don't like that. They want it shut down. Closing San Onofre has proven more difficult than originally anticipated and a lot more costly. My question to you is, when it comes to nuclear energy, there's a lot of people, a lot of scientists, a lot of politicians who believe that and I don't even think it's just a right and left issue, but there's a lot of politicians on both sides who believe that nuclear has to be part of the solution moving forward to ensure grid reliability, at least in the short term, if not the long term, because these other renewables, solar and wind, simply aren't at the viability stage they need to take the center stage for our energy dependence. What's your stance on this? I mean, do you sort of agree with the assessment that nuclear is like sort of this like necessary short-term solution, or conversely, do you actually think that nuclear is an efficient source of energy that should be like a long-term source of sustainability for us?
I think each jurisdiction and each country really needs to decide this for themselves. After the earthquakes, the disaster in Fukushima, Japan took all of its nuclear, or most of its nuclear power plants offline, and it dramatically increased the level of fossil fuels that it was emitting as a country. And now Germany has started to do the same thing. So there are individualized cases, and I don't think that I can make a generalized statement of nuclear is necessary, or nuclear is good, or nuclear is bad. It's an individual case-by-case basis. I know for a fact that it is a major problem that even though we decommissioned our nuclear power plants here in San Diego County, we still have waste like feet from the beach. And it's a problem because we are on a major fault line. We see just yesterday, more of the train tracks up in San Clemente were threatened by coastal erosion. We can't leave it there. And right now, there's no plan on where to move it. Harry Reid, when he was the Senate Majority Leader, he shut down the Yucca Canyon site. So now it's just there, and there's no plan to move it. And as far as I can tell, we're making minimal progress on it. I know that Congressmember Mike Levin has done a lot of work on this issue for his entire time in Congress, which he's been in for 5 years now. And he has a bill to incentivize places that want to take it. So it's good. It makes it more of a coalition of the willing, not just putting it places where people don't want it. I think that's a great idea. But right now, it still hasn't moved. It's still there, and we have to move it. It cannot stay there. And until we find a place to move it, I don't think that we should expand our current nuclear energy generation.
Sure.
It just seems irresponsible.
And just to be clear, for people to know, I think it's since 1974, correct me if I'm wrong, that there's been a moratorium on building new nuclear reactors in California. So it's not as if, I'm sure there are people who support new nuclear reactors in California, but it's not as if that's like on the table anytime soon. Now, it's interesting. I was reading this quote this morning from a climate report at the LA Times, who said that because nuclear energy produces zero carbon emissions, Diablo is viewed as a good temporary option. It would be easier to phase out fossil fuels, keeping Diablo open. Next generation nuclear technologies could help clean up the electric grid, keeping the lights on when the sun isn't shining, the wind isn't blowing, and short duration lithium batteries run out of juice. The idea being that other renewable energy sources, wind, solar, etc., have the problem of reliability. Sometimes the wind doesn't blow. If the batteries run out of juice, if the sun's not shining, they're not as reliable as nuclear energy. So sort of, do you see nuclear energy then as again, like a necessary evil, or are you somebody who's still open to the idea that this is part of the long-term future of renewable energy in California?
Hey there, classy viewers. Thanks for listening to our podcast. We're dedicated to providing you with quality content that inspires and brightens your day. But keeping it classy can be expensive. If you enjoy our content, we're asking for your support for the podcast using the donation link in the description below. Donations mean the world to us, and even as little as $5 can make a huge difference in helping us make this podcast a reality. Plus, donors are added to our shortlist to be the first to receive exclusive offers on merch, extra content, and even chances to appear on the pod. Anything you can give would truly be appreciated. Now get back to enjoying the rest of the podcast, and as always, stay classy.
First of all, I don't necessarily agree with the assessment that solar and wind power are unreliable. I mean, we have 330 days of sunshine in California, in this part of California, and I understand that's not the case everywhere else. We're talking about nationally, sure, maybe what you said is true, but solar is good and it's cost efficient, and we've made a lot of strides technologically in the last 10 years to make it more efficient. I mean, there's solar panels on my parents' house or solar panels on my house. A lot of people benefit from solar power here in this region, and I don't think we should look to other kinds of power generation because solar isn't doing the job. It's doing the job very well, actually, and we should continue investing in it.
Okay. So I wanted to shift gears a little bit here. So one thing that you have made, again, central to your campaign, and I know there's kind of two separate issues, but just forgive me, I'm going to conflate them for a second. You know, the issues of public safety and the issue of, you know, housing and homelessness that we have in San Diego County, that we have statewide. I think it's worth us spending a minute about this because, you know, public safety is, I feel like it's nationally, but like in California especially, has become very weaponized by some politicians to, you know, argue against like the status quo, to argue against, you know, for instance, Governor Newsom gets a lot of criticism over some of the bills that have been passed into law since he took office over the issue of public safety. There's been a lot of criticism of Prop 47, 57, AB 109, I believe, as well. There's also been a lot of criticism of Democratic officials in LA County and San Diego County for, you know, allegedly allowing crime to get out of hand. You know, San Francisco is sort of this very, you know, vilified example now nationally of a case where it seems like, from social media at least, theft and petty crimes are sort of out of control. And a lot of this gets blamed on the Democrats. So I guess the question is, like, for you, like public safety, like what is that actually, like what is actually your focus when it comes to public safety? Like, do you sort of agree with this? It's a kind of consensus that we seem to be getting, at least from the internet, that this is a bigger problem than ever before, or like what is your focus on when it comes to, you know, public safety, crime, et cetera?
Well, first of all, I don't get my crime statistics from Nextdoor. I get them from the sheriff's office and from Sandag, which aggregates all of our region's crime statistics. And Carlsbad is a very safe city, extremely safe.
Yes.
The FBI consistently ranks it among the safest cities in America. And there isn't this problem of massive crime and retail theft and car break-ins that we see in San Francisco. Now, those things absolutely do happen, and when it happens to you, it's a big problem. And
Yeah.
I mean, I've had things stolen from my vehicle, and it's always violating, and you want your government to stop it. So absolutely, I think that San Diego Mayor Todd Gloria is brave, and he's right in calling for amendments to Prop 47. He recently did that at his State of the City speech, and he is one of the first major Democrats to do that. And Prop 47 was important. It was in response to a federal court ruling that said our prisons are overcrowded in California because we're locking too many people up for nonviolent offenses like retail theft and drug crimes. And we've made a lot of progress in that, and I think the pendulum has maybe swung the other way, and it needs to, you know, fall back into the center. So we need to amend Prop 47. We need to allow for prosecutors to try people who are part of these like organized crime rings, organized retail theft operations that go from, you know, CVS to Target to Walgreens and just, you know, take things. I mean, we shouldn't be locking up the laundry detergent. Todd Gloria is right, and we don't have that much of a problem with it in Carlsbad. I mean, I can still go to the supermarket and I don't have to ask a clerk to unlock any glass cases, but it is a problem in California, and we're in California, so I support reform efforts to make sure that we make it more workable for every community, not just Carlsbad.
Hey, can I ask a question about something that Kevin said a little bit earlier, which relates to this? And that was, you said that you wanted to ban ghost guns in Carlsbad. And so I've been sitting here thinking about that a little bit, and it seems like the federal government is barely letting the states regulate any sort of gun issues, right? I think they just overturned like a high capacity magazine ban or something that we had in California that was a state law. So my question is, as far as like banning ghost guns in Carlsbad, like what effect could that have? What's kind of Yeah, I agree with the spirit of it, but what's kind of the point? How would that work?
So I think actually it's important that you brought that up. I think ghost guns are now banned in California, but we also need to give our police officers the tools that they need to take these illegal weapons off the streets. And that means people, since we're talking about criminal justice reform, people want to reform the pretext stops when an officer will stop a vehicle and question them on things that maybe aren't related to the original reason for stopping them. And there is evidence that those kind of stops and those kinds of arrests from those stops are targeted more at racial minorities, and that's important to solve that. But it's also important that the reform to that problem doesn't take away officers' ability to
Do the job, yeah.
Yeah, to do their job and make sure. I mean, there are hundreds of ghost guns, which are these guns that maybe they're 3D printed, or maybe they just like have a serial number scratched off of them. Those are all ghost guns, and we need to make sure that people who have these unlicensed firearms don't have them. And so police officers are an essential part of stopping that and taking those weapons off the streets, because if they're not serialized, if we don't know where they are, they could be used in a crime, and that crime will be harder to solve. So it's really important that we get ghost guns off the streets. It goes more than just banning them. I should have elaborated on that.
Sure. Yeah, no, it has to do with enforcement too. And another thing to do with enforcement, I mean, something I saw on your campaign website is like a priority for you is, the issue of the opioid epidemic and the fentanyl crisis that we have with fentanyl, being prevalent in a lot of the drug overdose deaths that we see, not just California, but nationwide. But, since we are a border region, here in San Diego County, I think it's especially pertinent, and I've seen sort of conflicting statistics on how much fentanyl is actually coming from across the border from Mexico to the United States, or whether it's more like of an internal issue. Like, what's your perspective on this? Like, what can we be doing to stop this epidemic of, overdose deaths from fentanyl? And also, like, do you sort of see this as like a unique like issue because we are like at the border, or like what's kind of your perspective there?
Yeah, we need to reform some of the state laws that we were talking about earlier with not just Prop 47, but we need to make sure that fentanyl is dealt with more strictly than it currently is, because what's happening now is the way it used to be is don't do drugs because you could become addicted with one hit, and your whole life will spiral out of control, and next thing you know, you'll be jobless and homeless, and your life will be destroyed. But that was bad, and it still is bad. Don't do drugs. But now it's a totally different scenario. It's a totally different thing where if you do fentanyl once, you could just die, and that's happening all over the country. Our opioid epidemic is getting worse and worse, and we need to stop these drugs from coming into the country, and we need to make sure that it's dealt with as a poisoning. It's not just selling drugs. They're poisoning our residents, and our kids are dying because of this.
Where are these drugs primarily coming from? Are they mostly coming from Mexico or somewhere else?
Well, I've also seen the same conflicting evidence that you mentioned earlier in your question. Yeah, I think it's a mix. I mean, I definitely think we are in a border region. There's a lot of drugs that come through ports of entry. There's kind of this myth that like our border isn't secure and that people just like walk across and carry duffel bags full of drugs. That doesn't happen.
I think it's a little harder than that, but
yeah, I imagine it's harder than that. I've never tried it, but these drugs do come through ports of entry. They are manufactured here in some cases. And they do come from Mexico. They do come from China. It's important that wherever they are, that they're stopped. And we need to make sure that not only are fentanyl dealers held accountable for murder, but they are also the public is educated, because it's a supply and a demand problem. So we have to get rid of the supply, but we also have to make sure that people know the dangers of fentanyl and make sure that they know one try could kill you.
I wonder why these drugs have gotten more lethal in the last 10, 20 years. Do you have any idea? Or
I've been fortunate to never become addicted to drugs.
No, me neither. But if you look at the 80s when all the Wall Street stockbrokers were doing cocaine or like in Miami or whatever, like, sure, it's always been bad for you, but we weren't seeing overdose deaths at quite the rate we are now. Because we weren't seeing like the level, the lacing with fentanyl was not like the same issue. So I'm just curious, like, at what point that kind of changed. And, we're probably not going to figure out in this conversation, but I think it's worth like thinking about, like, in terms of, like a question of more enforcement, education. I mean, it seems like it's a comprehensive issue. It's not just like one thing.
Yeah, it's both of those things for sure. Yeah. And I mean, even with weed, it's stronger now. So, and it's legal now, which I think is a good thing. But drugs will continue to become harder and harder.
Do you think that any drugs other than weed should be legalized, or do you have any opinion on that?
None that I know of. I mean, I definitely think that there is some. I couldn't go through all of the FDA's scheduling of different drugs that maybe are too strict. I mean, I had to wait. I was recovering from a surgery, and I had to go to Walgreens to get my prescription of Norco, which is an opioid. And I had to like wait there for an hour because they were like, "Oh, this is an opioid, so we have to open a timed safe," because I guess people rob the store. So,
yeah.
I mean, I don't know that the FDA has it right all the time, but no, I'm not advocating for legalization of any drugs.
Sure. What about Quaaludes? No, I'm just kidding. Sorry. We'll foster you.
Neither of us are old enough to know.
Neither of us. Rob maybe, but sorry to call you out, man.
Ow.
But I mean, just being realistic. Last issue I wanted to cover is just like I kind of said I would touch on it earlier and then I didn't, but in terms of like the housing issue that we've like kind of referenced throughout the conversation, obviously we all know housing is expensive. We know homelessness is a huge state issue, and it's an issue in San Diego County, although in Carlsbad actually recently homelessness went down, I think, by the last point in time count. But, continues to be an issue regionally. Sort of any like quick thoughts you have in terms of like, if elected to the City Council, like, and as like a regional advocate for the unhoused, like how we would, reform our approach and, turn this thing around.
Well, yeah, as you mentioned, we had two successive 20% drops in our homeless population in the last 2 point-in-time counts. And just yesterday, I did the point-in-time count in Carlsbad. I woke up at 3 in the morning to go. Actually, they gave me my own census tract, so I was, walking around trying to find homeless people.
Yeah.
And I was actually happy that we didn't find a single person.
You didn't find a single one?
I didn't find a single person. My group didn't. I know that other census tracts definitely did. There was one census tract where our staff kind of anticipated that there wouldn't be any either, but they found 12. So there are definitely it's an ongoing problem, and it's definitely increasing in the San Diego City core where there are
downtown.
There are a lot of services. Yeah, I mean downtown it's like in your face that
Yeah.
they just had even with the encampment ban that just went into place. Which has issues. I think is actually working. At least it's having some good effects and getting people into the help that they need, and making sure that our public spaces are usable and enjoyable again, and making sure that the people who serve the homeless population and who can help them get back on their feet know where to go and where to find them. So it is actually benefiting the city, I think, the homeless encampment ban, but there are definitely issues with it that need to be refined. And I'm glad that the city of San Diego is trying something. I mean, I can sit here and criticize it like every other politician in the county, but at least they're doing something. I mean, like, what is Encinitas doing? What is Carlsbad doing?
Yeah.
They're doing something.
I mean, that's a good point, but like, and I know that we're not going to be able to like fully flesh out the issue of homelessness in this conversation, but I did want to ask you, like, one of the things that I talked to Catherine Blakespear about when she was interviewed here like a few months ago, and something that I bring up all the time is the idea of has the housing first approach to homelessness like sort of failed at a state level? A lot of people say it has. I'm not necessarily trying to pigeonhole you, make you like pick a side, but like, do you have any like sort of overall assessment of like where we're headed as a state in terms of in the framework of like this housing first idea, or Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
So there's a lot of people who believe that homelessness is a housing problem primarily, and I think I agree with that for a few reasons. You look at cities that have very high rates of drug addiction, particularly in the Midwest, but have very low housing prices, and their homeless problem is not nearly as bad as places like on the California coast, where we don't have as high rates of drug addiction, but our housing prices are very high, and we have much higher rates of homelessness because of that. So there's definitely truth to the statement that housing prices and our lack of housing supply, which drive those housing prices, definitely increase homelessness. But there's also people who are not financially homeless. They're chronically homeless because of an untreated mental health illness, or an addiction to drugs, and those are kind of like three separate things. You can't solve all of the homelessness epidemic by just talking about housing supply, or by just talking about the increase in psychiatric beds in our region. We do have that problem too, where just like we don't have enough housing supply, which is driving up those prices, we don't have enough supply of psychiatric beds in the county. And what happens is our jails are becoming the de facto psychiatric beds in this county, because
Which I think we can all agree is bad.
we can all agree that that's bad. Yeah, I would hope so.
There's a lot of jail deaths too in San Diego County, which
There are.
is a whole separate issue. But it's yeah, I don't know how we're gonna figure that one out. That's a question for the sheriff. We gotta get her on the podcast. But yeah, in closing, something that we do on the show is we like viewer engagement, we like viewer stories, and we like feedback. Always feel free to reach out to us on Instagram or over email and let us know what you think of the show. But we love hearing your stories. We love hearing about what's going on in the community. If you have a minute, Kevin, we'll just take a minute and go over a couple viewer stories from the week in our Classy or Not segment, as we like to do. And everyone's welcome to weigh in on this. We got Danielle and Alyssa back here too, and Rob and Matt. So I like to pick and choose these stories very carefully, because we definitely get some submissions that are more R-rated, but I went on the PG side today. So
Thank you.
yeah, the first submission we have, and these are all anonymous, by the way, so I'm not going to read your name. This person says, I was putting my bag in the overhead of a flight next to another bag on my flight, and this girl said, be careful, that's a $500 purse, and then proceeded to move her bag to a different spot, even though it wasn't touching my bag. His question is, was it necessary to announce the price out loud? What do we think? Classy or not classy?
Definitely not classy.
From the girl's perspective.
Well,
on the girl's part, yeah.
Yeah, on the girl's part. It's. Have you ever seen that show Arrested Development? Where
Yes.
he's like yelling at the people who work for him, like, this is a $2,000 suit.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's gauche.
Unnecessary.
It's if you have to. I always tell people because I'm in politics now. If you have to tell people that you're an important person, you're not important. And the same thing is true for like expensive items like purses or cars.
Like
if you have to tell people like, oh, this was expensive.
Yeah.
You probably overpaid.
Probably. What do the only people here, presumably, who use purses think? The ladies, what do you guys think?
I think for sure not classy.
Okay.
Yeah, I think announcing the price of your bag probably does mean that you paid too much for it. So yeah.
I would have to agree.
All right, fair enough. That sounds like a overall consensus. I mean, I'm trying to think. I don't remember the last time I purchased like a personal article that was like $500, whether a piece of clothing or like I did purchase kind of I paid too much for a jacket a while back, which I regret. But I definitely wouldn't like go around and announce it. So
I mean, it's the case that like if actually rich people don't go around saying I'm rich.
No, you don't need to.
Yeah, exactly. Like people who like want to pretend to be rich go around buying super expensive stuff just because it's expensive, and yeah.
Yeah, money talks, wealth whispers. I believe that.
Love that proverb. Second story is, again, anonymous submission. This person says, when I was in the Navy on a deployment for Enduring Freedom, which was the Afghanistan war, a married female sailor got pregnant while at sea. Her husband was not on the ship, and any kind of sex is forbidden while deployed. The captain of the ship called an all-hands formation, 5,000 people on the aircraft carrier. and made her call her husband back home in front of everyone and explained to him that she was being kicked off the ship because she was pregnant with someone else's child. Classy move on the captain's part or not?
On the captain's part?
Yeah, for making her do that. That's a rough one.
I'm going to pass.
Yeah, okay. I think that's pretty brutal any way you cut it. Like, I mean, I think it's like pretty clear that what she did was wrong, but man, that is, talking about public humiliation, that's next level.
When you're in the military, you are under a different justice system, and they can do that to you. You give up a lot of your rights when you join the military. This story that you said, I told you my dad was in the Coast Guard. He was the commander of a large Coast Guard cutter, and this exact scenario happens.
What?
He did this.
Wow.
like 20 years ago. But,
like he was the one in charge that made that decision.
Yeah, I don't think he like made her call the whole.
But like
her husband in front of the crew.
The person was reprimanded.
The person had to leave the ship. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, they're strict about that stuff. They really are. Like it's not a joke.
When you're in the this happened when General Petraeus was in charge of the CIA, and he had the affair. When you're in the military, having an affair is a criminal offense.
Yeah, they put you for like a tribunal, right? Like, yeah.
So
it affects the rest of your life.
So,
yeah,
I feel bad for her though.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, obviously, like what she did was wrong, but you can't help but feel bad, right? Like, anybody else have any other thoughts, or, I mean.
Well, yeah, I feel like hearing that story, it sounds like she was the only one that was like punished for that. So I'm curious to know like what happened to
what
the
happened
other
to the
person.
guy? Was
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Because if nothing happened to him, then like that's also
kind of messed up
pretty
too.
unfair. Yeah.
But I mean, I feel like, that's just the military doesn't really care about like the kind of justice we think about. It's like they have their own internal structure and their own reasons for doing things, and for whatever reason, they don't really have to explain themselves to the rest of the world. So that's just kind of the way it is.
Yeah. I mean, it might not have been a crew member. I mean, they do dock at
we don't know.
Sometimes.
From the story, we don't know. So, I would say probably, I think my thought is not classy. I mean, I think there's probably a place to punish, but maybe not to, completely permanently scar through humiliation and trauma the woman at the same time. But that's just my assessment. I don't know if everyone agrees with that. But anyways, classy or not stories. We love you guys submitting these. You can submit them to our Instagram at stayclassysd_. You can email me as well, steve@stayclassypod.com. This has been Kevin Sabellico. Kevin, do you have any parting comments, anything you want people to know before we let you go? It's been so fun having you on.
Thank you so much for having me. This is going to be a very long campaign, and it's going to be between now and November 2024. So if you have any thoughts or any suggestions for me or want to get involved in my campaign, help me go out knocking on doors, handing this thing out to people, please get involved in my campaign. Go to kevinsabellico.org or email me, kevin@kevinsabellico.org. I really appreciate you having me on, Steve, and I look forward to coming back in a year as Carlsbad's newest council member.
Yeah, we'll make it around too then. All right.
Yes.
Nice to talk to you.
Thank you.
Soon. All right, that's a wrap, guys.
This has been another recorded episode of Stay Classy San Diego with your host, Steve Wire. Thanks again to our sponsor, MaxLux Media and maxluxmedia.com. Check us out at stayclassypod.com or any of our social media outlets. We're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and everywhere else you get your podcast content. Please like and subscribe to our channel. It really helps us continue bringing you important content that you're not going to see anywhere else. And thanks to all of our listeners for tuning into the show. See you next time. Stay classy, San Diego.